Have you ever witnessed someone's world crumble in an instant, not with a bang, but with a chilling, deafening silence? This is the story of Anton Hayes, a man who had it all: a brilliant career, a sharp mind, and what he believed was the perfect malleable wife. At the most important night of his professional life, he chose to publicly break her spirit to elevate his own. He thought her silence was weakness and her family was insignificant. He was wrong. What he didn't know was that in the shadows of that opulent ballroom, a judgment was being made, one that would lead him from the pinnacle of success to the depths of despair when he walked into his new boss's office and saw the woman he'd shattered standing there, holding all the power. Anton Hayes believed in the architecture of success. Every piece of his life was a carefully selected load-bearing component, designed to support his ascent. His tailored Armani suits were armor. His corner office on the 45th floor of the Innovate Dynamics Tower was his fortress. His marriage to Clara was in his mind, the elegant, understated foundation upon which the grander structure was built. Clara was not what his colleagues would have expected for a man of his ambition. She wasn't a corporate lawyer or a surgeon or the daughter of a board member. She was an artist, a freelance illustrator who worked from a small, sun-drenched studio in their sprawling minimalist home. She sold prints of whimsical landscapes and intricate floral designs on an Etsy shop. To Anton, her work was a cute little hobby, a harmless diversion that kept her occupied while he built an empire. Their life was a quiet, tense ballet of his expectations and her accommodations. He curated their existence with meticulous precision. He chose the house, the furniture, the cars, and even the right social circles. Clara, in turn, moved gracefully within the confines. He created her own vibrant colors, muted to fit his monochromatic world. She had once been a woman of passionate opinions and easy laughter, but years of being corrected, polished, and molded by Anton had worn her down into a quiet, placid version of herself. The tension in their home had become a low, constant hum, most audible in the silence between them. It was there in the way he'd glance at her paint-stained fingers with a faint curl of his lip, or in the way she'd flinch slightly when he entered a room as if bracing for a critique. This year, the hum was about to become a roar. The Innovate Dynamics annual Gala was approaching an event that was less a celebration and more a corporate battlefield. Mr. Sterling, the company's aging founder and CEO, was set to announce his retirement, the coveted position of Vice President of Strategic Development. Anton's obsession for the past 2 years was the prize for the man who best embodied the company's future. His only real rival was Mark Renshaw, a man whose ambition was matched only by his sycophantic charm. For Anton, the gala was the final interview. Everything had to be perfect, and that included Clara. "Have you decided what you're wearing to the gala?" he asked one evening, not looking up from his tablet where he was reviewing quarterly reports. Clara was sketching at the kitchen island, the soft scratch of her charcoal pencil, a stark contrast to the aggressive tapping of his fingers on the screen. "I was thinking of the blue silk dress I wore to the fundraiser last year. It's elegant." "No," he said the word sharp and final. He finally looked at her, his gaze clinical. "That dress is safe. Forgettable. This isn't a fundraiser for a dog shelter, Clara. This is my future. Mr. Sterling will be there. The entire board will be there. You need to look like the wife of a vice president." He slid his tablet across the marble island. "I've arranged for a stylist from Saks to come tomorrow. She'll bring options. We're going for something classic powerful. Chanel, Dior, something that says you belong. Clara looked down at her sketch, a detailed drawing of a wilting rose. My dress doesn't determine your competence, Anton. Everything is a reflection of me, he retorted, his voice dangerously low. Your dress, your conversation, your posture. I need you to be an asset, not a liability. That means no talking about your little drawings unless someone explicitly asks. Stick to safe topics, the market, the company's recent successes, golf. And for God's sake, don't mention your brother. This was a particularly sore point for Anton. Clara's brother Julian Vance was a ghost in their marriage. She spoke of him with a quiet, fierce affection, but he was a perpetual disappointment in Anton's eyes. Julian had dropped out of Stanford to pursue some vague tech idea, a startup he ran out of a garage. To Anton, a man who climbed the ladder one polished rung at a time, Julian was a failure, a cautionary tale. The fact that Clara still looked up to him was a source of constant irritation. Why would I mention Julian? Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because you get sentimental. You bring up your family, your humble roots. People at this level aren't interested in humble, Clara. They're interested in strength, in legacy. Your brother represents neither. She didn't argue. She had learned long ago that arguing with Anton was like throwing pebbles at a brick wall. All you got were bruised fingers and the same unmovable wall. Instead, she simply nodded, the charcoal pencil still in her hand. I understand, she said. He took that as acquiescence and returned to his tablet, satisfied. He didn't see the tiny tremor in her hand, nor the way the delicate petals of the rose she was drawing were suddenly smudged by a single errant tear that fell onto the page, blurring the lines between beauty and decay. He was too busy designing his triumph to notice the slow, silent demolition of his own foundation. The gala was in 3 days, and Anton Hayes was ready to ascend. He just had to make sure his wife didn't weigh him down. The Starlight Ballroom at the Fairmont was a galaxy of manufactured stars. Chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen rain, casting a brilliant, unforgiving light on the city's corporate elite. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos huddled in tight circles, their laughter sharp and competitive. Women in jewel-toned gowns drifted through the room, their smiles as curated as their outfits. Anton was in his element. He moved through the crowd with the predatory grace of a shark, a firm handshake. For one man, a shared knowing laugh with another. He was a master of this game, and tonight he was playing for the championship. Clara beside him felt like a borrowed doll. The stylist had put her in a severe black Tom Ford gown. It was undeniably expensive and exquisitely made, but it felt like a costume. Her hair, normally a soft cascade of waves, had been pulled into a tight, intricate chignon that gave her a headache. She was an accessory, a silent testament to Anton's good taste and financial prowess. There's Sterling. Anton murmured, his fingers digging into her arm. Remember what I said. Smile, nod, and let me do the talking. Mr. Sterling was a man from a bygone era, with a kind face etched with the lines of decades of responsibility. He was standing with his wife, a warm, matronly woman, and Mark Renshaw, who was already deep into a fawning anecdote. Anton, my boy, glad you could make it. Mr. Sterling boomed, his eyes crinkling. He turned to Clara. And Clara, you look absolutely stunning. That dress is a work of art. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Clara said, a genuine smile momentarily breaking through her carefully constructed facade. "It's a beautiful evening." "It certainly is," Anton interjected smoothly, placing a proprietary hand on the small of her back. "We were just admiring the company's incredible growth this year. The Q projections are a testament to your leadership, sir." The conversation flowed a river of corporate jargon and veiled compliments. Anton was brilliant, weaving in statistics and strategic insights, positioning himself as the natural successor. Clara stood by a silent, smiling statue, just as he had instructed. Mark Renshaw occasionally shot her a look of pitying condescension, which only fueled Anton's desire to win. The turning point of the evening came unexpectedly. Sterling, in a moment of genuine warmth, turned his full attention to Clara. "Anton tells me you're an artist, Clara," he said kindly. "I've always admired creative people. My daughter studied fine art. What sort of work do you do?" It was a simple, generous question, a small opening for her to be seen as a person. Before Clara could answer, Anton let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, Clara's far too modest to call herself an artist, sir," he said, his voice dripping with false affection that barely masked the contempt beneath. "She has a little online shop. Sells, what is it? Honey? Pictures of flowers and cottages. It's a wonderful little hobby to keep her busy while I'm at the office." The air crackled with a sudden, sharp silence. The word hobby hung in the air, weighted with dismissal. Mark Renshaw's lips twitched into a smirk. Mrs. Sterling's warm smile faltered. Even Mr. Sterling looked taken aback by the casual cruelty of the remark. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't just the words. It was the public stage he had chosen to diminish her on. He had taken her passion, the one part of her life that was truly her own, and reduced it to a child's pastime in front of the very people he was so desperate to impress. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, imagined their pity, their judgment. She was no longer a person, just the hobbyist wife of an important man. She looked at Anton, searching his face for any sign of remorse, but found only the gleam of triumph in his eyes. He thought this was a power move, demonstrating that he was a serious man, unburdened by frivolous domestic concerns. Her throat felt tight. She couldn't breathe. "Excuse me." She whispered the words, barely audible. She turned and walked away, her movements stiff and robotic. She didn't run. She didn't cause a scene. She simply glided through the crowd, her head held high, a portrait of cold, broken dignity. She walked past the champagne fountains and the string quartet through the gilded lobby and out into the cold night air. The frigid wind was a relief, shocking her system back to life. She hailed the first taxi she saw, the sleek black gown feeling like a shroud. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, she looked back at the grand hotel entrance. Through the gleaming glass doors, she could see Anton already laughing at something Mark Renshaw had said, his back turned to the door where his wife had just vanished. He hadn't even noticed she was gone. In the back of the cab, the tears finally came hot and silent. They weren't just tears of hurt, but of realization. The gilded cage had always been cold, but tonight he had locked the door and publicly thrown away the key. The foundation of their marriage hadn't just cracked, it had been pulverized into dust. Anton arrived home a little after midnight, flush with victory. The rest of the evening had gone perfectly. After Clara's quiet exit, which he'd smoothly explained away as a sudden migraine, he had monopolized Mr. Sterling's attention. He'd been confident, articulate, and visionary. Renshaw, by comparison, had seemed like a fawning amateur. The VP position was his. He could taste it. He strode into their cavernous, silent house, shrugging off his tuxedo jacket. Clara, he called out, expecting to find her in bed, nursing her manufactured headache. There was no reply. He walked into their master bedroom. The bed was pristine, untouched. A chill colder than the late-night air snaked up his spine. On her side of the bed, perfectly folded, was the black Tom Ford gown. Beside it lay the diamond earrings he had gifted her for their anniversary. They looked like chips of ice on the dark wood of the nightstand. He checked her art studio. It was dark and still. He then noticed the closet in their bedroom was slightly ajar. He pulled it open. A significant section of her clothes was gone. Her favorite worn jeans, her soft cashmere sweaters, her simple cotton dresses. A suitcase was also missing. Annoyance, not concern, was his first reaction. How dramatic. How childish. She was trying to punish him for a throwaway comment. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. He sent a curt text. "This is ridiculous. Call me." He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid sloshing in the crystal tumbler. He replayed the evening in his mind. The humiliation hadn't been his intention. Not really. It was a strategic calculation. He needed to show Sterling that he was a man focused solely on the prize, not distracted by a wife's quaint little projects. Clara was supposed to understand that. She was supposed to be a team player. Her running off like this was selfish. It was a betrayal. He slept poorly, waking several times to check his phone. No calls, no messages. The silence in the house was unnerving. He was accustomed to the soft sounds of Clara's presence, the quiet rustle of her turning a page in a book, the gentle hum of her working in her studio. Now the silence was an accusation. The next morning he dressed for work with methodical precision, the knot of his tie pulled extra tight. He told himself she'd be back by the time he got home from work, full of apologies. This was just a tantrum. He would be magnanimous and forgive her, and then they could move on. His focus needed to be on the office. Meanwhile, miles away, Clara sat in a coarsome, sunny-lit kitchen that smelled of coffee and old books. She was wearing one of her brother's old, oversized Stanford sweatshirts. She hadn't slept, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of clarity. After leaving the gala, she hadn't gone to a hotel or a friend's house. She had made one phone call. "Julian," she had said, her voice cracking. "Can you come get me?" He hadn't asked questions. He'd simply said, "Send me your location. I'm on my way." Julian Vance lived in a modest, unassuming house in a quiet neighborhood across the bay, a far cry from the glass and steel mansion she shared with Anton. His garage startup had over the last decade grown into Auratech, a revolutionary software company that had quietly become one of the most powerful and disruptive forces in Silicon Valley. He was notoriously private, avoiding the tech mogul spotlight, his picture rarely appearing in the press. Anton, in his arrogant dismissal, had never bothered to do a simple Google search. He only knew Julian as Clara's dropout brother, who tinkered with computers. Julian now sat across from her at his rustic wooden table, his face a mixture of concern and a tightly controlled fury. He had listened without interruption as she recounted the story of the gala, her voice hollow and emotionless. "He called it my hobby," she finished, staring into her mug of tea. "He made me feel so small. And it wasn't the first time, Julian. It was just the last." Julian reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His hands were warm and steady. "I'm so sorry, Clara. I'm sorry I didn't see the extent of it. I knew he was arrogant, but I didn't know he was cruel. I hid it, she confessed. I was embarrassed. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I was just better, a better wife, more supportive, more like the women he admired. There's nothing wrong with you, Julian said, his voice firm. You are the most talented, kind-hearted person I know. The fault is not yours, it's his. He paused, his expression hardening. And he's about to learn that actions have consequences. Clara looked up, puzzled. What do you mean? Just trust me, Julian said. For now, this is your home. Rest. Paint. Breathe. Let me handle the rest. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. But this time, it wasn't a tear of pain. It was a tear of release. She was safe. She was with someone who saw her not as an accessory or a liability, but as a person worthy of respect. Back at Innovate Dynamics, Anton strode into the office, projecting an aura of unshakable confidence. He nodded crisply at his subordinates, his mind already decorating his new VP office. He saw Mark Renshaw by the coffee machine, who gave him a smug, knowing look. Rough night? Hayes Renshaw asked, stirring his coffee. Your wife seemed a bit overwhelmed. She was feeling under the weather. Anton lied smoothly. She's fine, unlike our Q3 profit margins, which could use a little intensive care. He walked away, leaving Renshaw scowling. He was in control. Everything was going according to plan. He sat at his desk, ignoring the gaping silence from his phone, and began drafting a 90-day strategy plan for his new role as vice president. He was so focused on the future he was building that he remained blissfully unaware that his past actions had already condemned it to rubble. The first tremor hit on Monday morning. It arrived not as a dramatic earthquake, but as a quiet, company-wide email that landed in every inbox at 9:05 a.m. The subject line was deceptively simple. An important announcement regarding the future of innovative dynamics. Anton, engrossed in his VP strategy plan, almost dismissed it. But the buzz in the office was instantaneous and impossible to ignore. A low murmur started in the cubicles and swelled as people read the memo. Heads popped up over partitions, and worried whispers filled the air. Anton opened the email. His eyes scanned the corporate prose, his heart rate quickening with each line. Innovate Dynamics. A bastion of old-school tech for 30 years had been acquired. The buyer was a powerhouse he'd only read about in the most exclusive financial journals, Auratech. The email stated that the acquisition was effective immediately. Mr. Sterling was stepping down, and a new leadership team from Auratech would be transitioning in over the course of the week. Anton's first feeling was a jolt of panic. An acquisition threw everything into chaos. His carefully laid plans, his schmoozing of Sterling, his guaranteed path to the VP suite, it could all be for nothing. But then, a second more powerful feeling took over ambition. Auratech was a legend. They were innovators, disruptors. To be a VP at the old Innovate Dynamics was one thing. To be a VP in this new integrated powerhouse was a whole new level of prestige. This wasn't a setback. It was an upgrade. He just had to prove his worth to a new set of masters. "Did you see this?" Mark Renshaw said, appearing at the door of Anton's office, his face pale. "We've been bought. By Julian Vance." "I know his name," Anton said, coolly, projecting an air of calm he did not feel. "He's a recluse. A genius, they say. This is a massive opportunity, Mark. Don't look so terrified. An opportunity, Renshaw scoffed. They'll bring in their own people. We're all dead men walking. Speak for yourself, Anton retorted. Companies like Auratech don't get to the top by firing talent. They reward it. I plan to be indispensable. Throughout the day, the office was a hotbed of speculation. Everyone was frantically Googling Auratech and its enigmatic founder, Julian Vance. What they found was sparse. He was a visionary who had built his empire on a philosophy of radical empathy in the workplace. Auratech was famous for its incredible company culture, its flat hierarchies, and its ruthless focus on innovation and integrity. There were almost no photos of Vance himself. He was a ghost, a legend, who valued privacy above all else. Anton saw his opening. While others panicked, he would strategize. He spent the day revamping his 90-day plan, tailoring it to Auratech's known corporate values. He peppered it with buzzwords he found in articles about them. Synergy, human-centric design, ethical innovation. He would show this new CEO, this Julian Vance, that he wasn't just some old guard manager from a company that was being put out to pasture. He was a forward thinker, a perfect fit for their new world. By Tuesday, the name Julian Vance was on everyone's lips. Rumor had it he would be addressing the company in an all-hands meeting on Wednesday morning. The atmosphere in the office was thick with a mixture of fear and awe. Anton's home life, however, remained a silent void. Clara had not responded to his texts or calls. Her absence, which had started as an annoyance, was now a source of gnawing unease. It was inconvenient and worse, embarrassing. What if one of the new executives invited him to dinner, and he had to explain his wife had run off? He needed to fix this, and fast. He sent her one last text, this one attempting a softer tone. Clara, this has gone on long enough. I'm sorry about what I said at the gala. It was a stressful night. Please come home. We have big news at work, and I want to share it with you. He hit send and stared at the screen. The message remained a single blue bubble in a sea of his own unanswered pleas. The delivered receipt appeared, but the read notification never came. Frustrated, he pushed his personal life aside. It was a distraction he couldn't afford. The future of his career was being decided this week. On Wednesday, he would meet the new king. He laid out his best suit, a charcoal grey Canale more modern and understated than his usual Armani, and rehearsed his elevator pitch in the mirror. He would be impressive. He would be memorable. He would be the first person Julian Vance would recognize as essential. The whispers in the halls were of an ending, but for Anton Hayes, they were the herald of a glorious new beginning. He was sure of it. Wednesday morning, the main auditorium at Innovate Dynamics was packed to capacity. The air was electric with anxiety. Employees stood in tight clusters, speaking in hushed tones. Anton had secured a seat in the third row center aisle, close enough to be seen, but not so close as to appear desperate. He smoothed the lapels of his Canale suit, his face a mask of calm, professional readiness. Mark Renshaw was a few rows back, looking visibly stressed, constantly checking his phone. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the lights dimmed. Mr. Sterling walked onto the stage looking smaller and older than he had just a few nights ago at the gala. He approached the podium and cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the silent room. "Good morning," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "As you all know, Innovate Dynamics is entering a new chapter. For 30 years, we have been a family. And like all families, we are now evolving. He gave a brief, heartfelt speech about his time as CEO, thanking his employees. Anton barely listened, his focus entirely on what and who was coming next. "It is now my great honor," Mr. Sterling concluded, his voice regaining some of its old strength, "to introduce you to the visionary who will be leading us into the future. The founder and CEO of Auratech, Mr. Julian Vance." A figure emerged from the wings of the stage. He was younger than Anton had expected, perhaps in his late 30s. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit, but a simple, well-fitted dark sweater, dark jeans and stylish but understated leather sneakers. He had an air of quiet confidence, a relaxed posture that somehow commanded more authority than Anton's own rigid formality. His face was thoughtful, his eyes sharp and intelligent. Anton leaned forward, studying the new CEO. He felt a flicker of something, a vague, unplaceable familiarity, but dismissed it. This was the man who held his future in his hands. Julian Vance didn't stride to the podium. He walked to the center of the stage, holding a small microphone, and simply stood there for a moment, making eye contact with people in the audience. The room was utterly silent. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and clear. It was a voice used to being listened to. "My name is Julian Vance. I know there's a lot of uncertainty in this room right now. You're wondering what an acquisition means for you, for your work, for your future. I'm not here to give you a speech full of corporate platitudes. I'm here to make you a promise." He began to walk slowly across the stage as he spoke. Auratech did not acquire Innovate Dynamics to strip it for parts. We acquired you because of the talent in this room. We acquired you because of your history of innovation. But we are going to change things. The culture here, from what I understand, has become one of fear, of internal competition, of valuing profit over people. That ends today. Anton felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly the kind of language he had used in his revised strategy memo. This man was speaking his language. He was a true visionary. At Auratech, Julian continued, "We have one core principle: integrity. That means integrity in our products, integrity in our business practices, and most importantly, integrity in how we treat each other. We believe that a person's character is more important than their last quarter's sales figures. We believe that respect is not a bonus, it's a baseline requirement. We will not tolerate arrogance. We will not tolerate cruelty. We will not tolerate a culture where people are made to feel small in order for others to feel big." As Julian said those last words, "made to feel small," his eyes seemed to sweep across the front rows, and for a split second, Anton felt as if the man's gaze lingered on him. A cold shiver ran down Anton's spine, a primal sense of unease that he couldn't explain. He quickly dismissed it as paranoia. The speech concluded with a vision for the future, a powerful and inspiring roadmap for the integrated company. When he finished, the auditorium erupted in thunderous applause. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was applause of genuine relief and excitement. Even Renshaw was clapping enthusiastically. Over the next 2 days, Julian announced over the applause, "I will be meeting with all senior management individually. I want to hear from you directly. My assistant will be sending out a schedule this afternoon." The meeting was over. As the crowd began to disperse, Anton remained in his seat, his mind racing. A one-on-one meeting. This was his chance. He wouldn't just be a face in the crowd. He would have the full, undivided attention of Julian Vance. He would present his strategy plan, He would talk about synergy and human-centric design. He would show him that he, Anton Hayes, was the embodiment of the new culture Julian envisioned. He felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Mark Renshaw. "Well," Renshaw said, a strange look on his face that was something else. "Did you get a weird vibe from him at all?" "The only vibe I got was one of true leadership," Anton said dismissively. "Something this company has been sorely lacking." "I don't know, man," Renshaw muttered, looking back at the now empty stage. There was a moment there when he was talking about arrogance. It felt personal, and he kind of looks familiar. Can't place it. "You're just nervous you're about to be made redundant," Anton sneered. "Focus on polishing your resume. I'll be focusing on my future." He walked out of the auditorium with a confident stride, his mind already preparing for the most important meeting of his life. The faint nagging feeling of familiarity he'd felt when he first saw Julian Vance was completely overshadowed by the bright, blinding glare of his own ambition. The email arrived at 2:15 p.m. Anton's meeting with Julian Vance was scheduled for the following day, Thursday, at 11:00 a.m. in the CEO's office, the office that had for decades belonged to Mr. Sterling. Anton spent the next 20 hours in a state of meticulous preparation. He refined his presentation, memorized key talking points, and even researched Julian Vance's philanthropic interests, hoping to find common ground. He didn't sleep. The adrenaline of opportunity was a more potent stimulant than coffee. Clara remained a distant nagging thought, a problem to be solved later. His entire universe had contracted to that 11:00 a.m. meeting. Thursday morning, he stood before the mirror in his apartment, adjusting his tie. The silence of the empty home was a void he refused to acknowledge. He looked at his reflection, the sharp suit, the confident expression, the glint of his expensive watch. This was the image of success. This was the man Julian Vance was about to meet. He arrived at the executive floor at 10:50 a.m. The air here was different, rarefied. Julian's new executive assistant, a calm, efficient woman, offered him water. "Mr. Vance will be with you in a moment," she said with a polite smile. At exactly 11:00 a.m., the door to the CEO's office opened. "Mr. Hayes." "He's ready for you." Anton took a deep breath, straightened his jacket, and plastered his most engaging smile on his face. He walked into the spacious office, his hand outstretched, his opening line rehearsed and ready. "Mr. Vance, it's an honor. Anton Hayes, I have some ideas about the company's transition that I believe you'll find very compelling." His voice trailed off. His extended hand froze in midair. Julian Vance was not alone. He was standing by the vast window that overlooked the city, but he wasn't looking at the view. His attention was on the person standing beside him. It was Clara. She wasn't the subdued, timid woman from the Gala. She was dressed in simple, elegant trousers and a soft cream-colored silk blouse. Her hair was down, falling in its natural waves. Her expression was not one of sadness or anger, but of a profound, unshakable calm. She looked directly at Anton, her eyes clear and steady. She was not a victim here. She was a presence. Anton's brain struggled to process the scene. It was a cognitive dissonance of epic proportions. His wife, his insignificant hobbyist wife, was standing in the new CEO's office as if she belonged there. His mind scrambled for an explanation. Had she come here to ambush him, to cause a scene, to complain to his new boss? "You," he stammered, his gaze flicking from Clara to Julian. Julian Vance took a step forward. His face was devoid of the warmth and inspiration he had projected on stage. His expression was as cold and hard as granite. He completely ignored Anton's outstretched hand. "Mr. Hayes," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I believe you've already met my sister." The word hit Anton with the force of a physical blow. Sister! The world tilted on its axis. A roaring sound filled his ears. The vague familiarity, the odd feeling that he'd seen Julian before, it all clicked into place with sickening clarity. A photograph on Clara's nightstand when they were first dating. A younger Julian, grinning arm slung around his sister. A picture Anton had dismissed as irrelevant. Clara's dropout brother. The one who tinkered with computers. Julian Vance. His mind flashed back to the gala. His casual cruelty. His dismissive words about her little hobby. The condescending tone. His pronouncement that her brother was a failure who represented nothing of value. He had said all of that in the presence of greatness and had been too blind, too arrogant to see it. The strength drained from his legs. The blood rushed from his head, leaving him dizzy and cold. His carefully constructed facade of confidence didn't just crack, it disintegrated into dust. He stumbled backward, his hand fumbling for the doorframe to keep himself from falling. His breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. "Sister," he whispered the word, a pathetic croak. Clara said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silent, steady gaze was more damning than any accusation. It was the gaze of someone who had seen him for exactly what he was and was no longer afraid. Julian's eyes narrowed, pinning Anton in place. "Yes. My sister Clara Vance, the brilliant artist whose work you so eloquently dismissed as a little hobby. The woman you humiliated in front of your colleagues to score corporate points. I was there, Mr. Hayes, at the gala, in the background. Clara invited me. I saw it all. The collapse was complete. It wasn't just his career prospects evaporating. It was the utter annihilation of his ego, his self-perception, his entire reality. He had built his life on the principle of judging others, of sorting them into categories of useful and useless. And he had made the most catastrophic miscalculation of his life. He stared at the man who held his entire world in his hands, and at the woman he had broken, who was now impossibly standing beside him. Anton Hayes. The master of the game hadn't just been outplayed. He had been playing the wrong game all along. The silence in the CEO's office was absolute, broken only by Anton's ragged breathing. The grand view of the city skyline behind Julian and Clara seemed to mock him, a panorama of a world he was no longer a part of. "You see, Mr. Hayes." Julian continued, his voice a blade of ice, "the core principle I spoke of yesterday. Integrity isn't just a buzzword I use in speeches. It's the metric by which I measure everything. A man who treats his own family with such profound disrespect is not a man I can trust to manage a team, to nurture talent, or to represent this company." He walked over to the large mahogany desk, the desk Anton had dreamed of having one day, and picked up a folder. "I read your file. You're brilliant. Your numbers are impeccable. On paper, you are the perfect executive. But a person's true character isn't revealed on a spreadsheet. It's revealed in the small moments, in how you treat the person you promise to love and protect when you think no one of consequence is watching." Anton tried to speak, to form an apology, an excuse, anything. But his throat was closed, his mind a chaotic whirl of panic and regret. I didn't know." "That's the point," Julian cut him off sharply. "You didn't know she was my sister. And it shouldn't matter. Her worth, her right to be treated with dignity, is not derived from her relationship to me. You should have treated her that way because she is a human being. Your wife." He gestured toward Clara. "Her little hobby has led to 2 gallery exhibitions and a commission to design the branding for a national charity. She is more talented and successful in her chosen field than you could ever comprehend because you never bothered to look." Finally, Clara spoke. Her voice was not the whispery, hesitant one he was used to. It was clear and firm. "The problem, Anton, was never my art or my family," she said, taking a step forward. "The problem was that you needed me to be small so that you could feel big. I spent years shrinking myself to fit into the little box you built for me. But I'm done with that. Now." From her handbag, she pulled out a crisp, folded legal document. She walked over to where Anton was still leaning against the doorframe for support and held it out to him. "These are divorce papers," she said simply. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours." He stared at the papers as if they were a venomous snake. This was it. The complete and total severing. The end of everything. Julian delivered the final blow. "Your position at this company is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. We will, of course, honor the terms of your contract regarding severance. But I would advise you not to use Innovate Dynamics or Auratech as a reference. I assure you my review of your character would be honest." He paused, his gaze unrelenting. "Your rival Mark Renshaw, on the other hand, is getting the VP promotion. At the gala, after you humiliated your wife, he found mine and apologized on your behalf for the boorish display. Turns out he has a modicum of decency, a quality we value here." The mention of Renshaw was the final petty twist of the knife. Anton snatched the divorce papers from Clara's hand, the rustle of the paper a sound of finality. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. He turned and stumbled out of the office, nearly colliding with Julian's assistant, who looked at him with a practiced, neutral expression that was worse than pity. The walk to his office was the longest of his life. Every head that turned, every whisper he heard, felt like a judgment. The news would travel through the building at the speed of light. He was no longer Anton Hayes, the brilliant executive. He was a cautionary tale. 6 months later, the city was moving into spring. Clara Vance stood in the middle of her new art studio, a bright, airy loft space downtown with huge windows that flooded the room with natural light. The walls were covered with her canvases, vibrant, bold, and full of life. Her online shop had exploded in popularity after a feature in a major design magazine personally arranged by her brother. She was preparing for her first solo international show in London. She was happy her laughter once again, easy and frequent. Anton Hayes was a ghost. Fired for character issues, the word of his public downfall spread through the tight-knit corporate world. No reputable company would touch him. He had sold his grand, empty house at a loss and was living in a small, generic apartment, a shadow of the man he once was. He had lost his job, his wife, and the one thing he had valued above all else, his status. He had built his entire identity on the architecture of success, and had discovered too late that its foundation was rotten to the core. Clara picked up a brush, dipped it in a brilliant shade of blue, and made the first confident stroke on a new canvas. She was no longer drawing wilting roses. She was painting a thriving forest full of light and color, a world of her own making. A year had passed since Anton Hayes's world had imploded within the 4 walls of the CEO's office. Autumn had returned its crisp air, a chilling reminder of the season of his downfall. The echoes of that day had not faded. They had simply changed their tune from a deafening crash to a low, persistent hum of failure that followed him everywhere. He sat in the sterile, beige waiting room of a mid-tier financial consultancy, a firm so far beneath his former station that a year ago he wouldn't have even entertained poaching their junior staff. The suit he wore was one of his old ones, a zegnya, but it felt different now. On his frame, once broad with confidence, it hung like a costume from a past life. He was no longer a captain of industry. He was just another man in his 40s with a gap in his resume and a story he couldn't tell. Hayes. A young, painfully earnest HR manager called his name. Anton forced a smile and followed him into a small, windowless office. The interviewer, a man named Peterson, was a decade younger than him, with an expression that tried for professional neutrality but settled on poorly concealed curiosity. He knew. They always knew. The corporate world was a small, gossipy village, and Anton's spectacular fall from grace was the stuff of legend. "Your resume is impressive." Anton Peterson began tapping a pen on the printed sheet. "Innovate Dynamics, Senior Project Manager. You left just as the Auratech acquisition was finalized. Can you tell me about that transition?" This was the verbal dance he'd performed a dozen times. He had a carefully crafted narrative about wanting to pursue new ventures about the acquisition being a natural endpoint for his tenure. But the lie was thin, and his own lack of conviction made it transparent. Auratech's vision was a significant departure from the established culture. Anton recited the words tasting like ash. "I felt it was the right time to seek opportunities that were more aligned with my own strategic approach." Peterson nodded slowly, his eyes betraying nothing. "I see. It says here you've been doing independent consulting for the past year. Any notable clients?" Anton's mind went blank. His consulting had consisted of a few humiliating, low-paying projects for friends of friends who were really just doing him a favor. He had no notable clients. He had nothing notable. He was a ghost haunting the ruins of his own career. He offered another vague, polished answer, but he could feel the interview slipping away. He saw not a potential employer across the table, but a judge, and the verdict was already in. Thousands of miles away, in a brightly lit gallery in London's Mayfair district, the clinking of champagne glasses and the excited murmur of conversation filled the air. At the center of it all stood Clara Vance, radiant in a flowing emerald green dress. She was surrounded by critics, collectors, and friends, all gathered for the opening night of her first international solo exhibition, Reconstruction. Her paintings lined the walls, a stunning visual journey. The early pieces were delicate and intricate, beautiful, but constrained much like she had been. The newer works, however, were an explosion of color and emotion. They were bold, expansive, and unapologetically alive. One large canvas, the centerpiece of the collection, depicted a shattered porcelain doll, but from the cracks grew vibrant, defiant wildflowers. Julian stood by her side, a glass of sparkling water in his hand, a look of immense pride on his face. "They love it, Clara," he said, his voice a low murmur amidst the noise. "You've captivated them." "It doesn't feel real," she confessed, her eyes scanning the crowd. "A year ago, I was afraid to even call myself an artist out loud." "You were always an artist," Julian corrected gently. "You just needed the right environment to flourish. An environment without a ceiling." She turned to him, her expression serious. "Thank you, Julian, for everything, for catching me when I fell." "I didn't catch you," he said, meeting her gaze. "I just reminded you that you had wings. The rest was all you." A journalist approached them, then asking Clara about her inspiration. She spoke with a newfound confidence, her voice clear and articulate, explaining the themes of recovery and the beauty that can be found in what was once broken. She never once mentioned Anton's name. He was not her inspiration. Her survival of him was. Later that evening, after the gallery had closed, Clara was walking with Julian along the Thames. The city lights danced on the dark water. "Have you heard anything about him?" she asked quietly. It was the first time she had brought him up in months. Julian hesitated. "Some whispers. He's struggling to find work. He sold the house. He's adrift." Clara stopped and looked out at the river, a sad, thoughtful expression on her face. There was no triumph in her, no vindictive pleasure. There was only a quiet, profound sense of closure. "I hope he figures it out," she said softly. "I hope he learns that building a life isn't about winning. It's about what you create, not what you conquer." After the disastrous interview, Anton didn't go home. He walked aimlessly through the financial district, a place that had once been his kingdom. The towering glass buildings now seemed to loom over him, judging him. As he waited at a crosswalk, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb, the back window lowered. It was Mark Renshaw. He looked exactly as Anton had always known him, impeccably dressed, a confident smirk on his face, but now he wore the title of Executive VP. Anton Renshaw set his tone a smooth blend of surprise and pity. "Didn't expect to see you around here." Anton felt a hot flush of shame. "Mark," he managed to say, his voice tight. "How are things?" Renshaw asked the question, a formality he clearly had no interest in. "Keeping busy." Consulting Anton lied the word, feeling weaker than ever. Right. "Well, look, it was good to see you," Renshaw said, already signaling his driver to move on. He paused, then added as an afterthought, "Listen, if you ever need anything, a character reference for something a little more junior, let me know. Happy to help an old colleague out." The window slid up, and the car disappeared into the stream of traffic. The offer, couched as kindness, was the most profound insult Anton had ever received. It was a confirmation of his complete and utter fall. He was no longer a rival to be feared, but a charity case to be pitied. He stood frozen on the sidewalk as people bustled past him. He caught his reflection in the dark, polished granite of a building's facade. He saw a man who looked tired and lost. The arrogant gleam in his eye was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. For the first time, with no one to impress and nothing left to lose, he saw himself not as the architect of success, but as the sole architect of his own desolation. The city was full of echoes, and every single one of them was his own name whispered as a warning. Thank you for listening to this story of ambition, betrayal, and poetic justice. The tale of Anton and Clara is a powerful reminder that our true character isn't defined by our titles or our wealth, but by how we treat those closest to us, especially when we think no one is watching. It reminds us that strength often comes in the quietest forms, and that underestimating someone can lead to our own downfall. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to hit the like button. It really helps our channel grow. Share this video with someone who appreciates a story of empowerment and consequences. And most importantly, if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. We all have stories worth telling, and we're so grateful to be able to share them with you. Thank you for being a part of our community.